I'm Mackenzie Davis, 34, sitting in the back row of courtroom 7, watching my sister Hazel stand trial for drug trafficking. My family's whispers echo in my head. You failed her. Nobody here even recognizes me. I raised Hazel after our parents practically abandoned us. I gave up everything and yet, somehow, I'm still the villain in their version of the story. The judge shuffles some papers, glances up, then suddenly freezes. His eyes lock on mine, widening. Wait, you're the governor. If you're enjoying this story, please hit like and subscribe. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Are you close with your siblings? Or have you ever experienced a family betrayal? Let me know in the comments as we continue this unexpected journey. I grew up in Millfield, Michigan, a town so small it barely existed on any map. Our house on Maple Street looked picture perfect on the outside white picket fence, neatly trimmed, lawn, flower boxes under every window, but looks can lie. Inside, our parents, Caroline and Richard Davis, were more like ghosts than guardians. Mom worked as a receptionist at a dental clinic, and Dad jumped between construction jobs. Their physical presence was about the only thing they offered. Mom would come home, pour a gin and tonic, and disappear into her room. Dad either stayed late at work or sat silently in front of the TV, a fortress of beer cans slowly rising around him as the night wore on. I learned to cook when I was 7 because no one else would. It started with simple things: sandwiches, canned soup, pasta. By the time I was 9, I was doing laundry, scrubbing floors, and making grocery lists. They gave me money for basics, sure, but the actual doing fell on me. I became an adult long before any child should. When I was 11, Mom announced she was pregnant again. It wasn't planned. Neither of them looked remotely happy. I, on the other hand, was thrilled. A baby sister. Someone to love. Someone who might finally love me back. I decorated the spare room with second-hand baby items I'd found at yard sales. I read every parenting book in the town library. Honestly, I was more ready for Hazel's arrival than they were. She was born on a rainy Tuesday in April, with wispy dark hair and piercing blue eyes. The moment I held her, a fierce protectiveness surged through me. This child would have the childhood I never got. I would make sure of it. Our parents, already barely interested in raising kids, seemed to care even less now. Mom, I now know, suffered from postpartum depression, but back then, it went untreated. Dad started working longer hours, supposedly because we needed the money. Realistically, he just didn't want to be around a crying baby. By the time Hazel was 6 months old, I was the one waking up for midnight feedings, changing diapers, and singing lullabies. School became both my escape and my burden. I kept straight A's because I knew education was my ticket out. But every afternoon, I rushed home to care for Hazel. Teachers noticed something was off. They asked questions. Lead Mom's just tired. Dad's working overtime. I became skilled at dodging the truth, terrified that if I told, they'd take Hazel away from me. As Hazel grew, so did our bond. I taught her to read, to tie her shoes, to ride a bike. I helped with her homework, kissed her scraped knees, braided her hair for picture day, and sewed costumes for her school plays. In every real sense, I was her mother. Money was always tight. Dad's job situation was unstable, and Mom's paycheck barely kept the mortgage afloat. When I turned 16, I got a job at the local diner working weekends and evenings. Every dollar I earned went to Hazel. New shoes when hers didn't fit, notebooks and crayons when school started, birthday gifts so she'd never feel less than the other kids. One winter was especially brutal. Dad got laid off for 3 months. The heating bill went unpaid, and the house turned into an icebox. I used my savings to buy a small space heater for Hazel's room. We'd huddle there under a mountain of blankets, reading stories late into the night. I told her it was an adventure, that we were explorers in the Arctic. She believed me. Her eyes sparkled with wonder instead of fear. Emotionally, I was running on fumes, while other teens went to football games and parties. I was planning grocery budgets and helping with spelling tests. I cried myself to sleep more nights than I could count. The pressure was suffocating. But I never let Hazel see me break. To her, I was steady, strong, always smiling. When people questioned my parents, they shrugged it off. "You're so good with her," Mom would say. Like that somehow justified her absence. "She prefers you anyway," Dad muttered once, absolving himself of any responsibility. They convinced themselves that I chose this, that I wanted to play mom, that I was just mature for my age. But it wasn't a choice. It was survival. As Hazel neared school age, I started to worry deeply about her future. I was her safety net, but what would happen when I eventually left for college? That question kept me up at night. Deep down, I knew I had to create a better life for both of us, but how could I do that without abandoning her in the process? It felt like an impossible dilemma, one that would eventually rip us apart. Despite the overwhelming responsibilities at home, I excelled academically. School became both my escape and my hope for the future. While Hazel napped or after she went to sleep, I would study until my eyes burned, driven by a relentless determination to build opportunities for both of us. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Bennett, was the first adult who ever truly saw me. During my junior year, she called me into her office after she found me asleep in the library during lunch. "Mackenzie, you're one of the brightest students I've ever worked with," she said gently. "But you're running yourself into the ground. What's going on at home?" After years of silence, something inside me cracked. I told her everything. The neglectful parents, raising Hazel since infancy, working weekends, maintaining a perfect 4.0 GPA. Instead of calling social services, which had always been my biggest fear, she listened. Then she helped me make a plan. "You need to go to college," she said firmly. "With your grades and your story, we'll find scholarships. You can build a better life for both you and Hazel." Over the next year, Mrs. Bennett guided me through university applications and financial aid forms. When the acceptance letters began arriving, I felt both excitement and dread. The University of Michigan offered me a full scholarship to study political science and public policy. It was everything I had worked for, but accepting meant leaving Hazel behind with our parents. I agonized over the decision for weeks. I made detailed plans to protect Hazel in my absence. I even approached my parents with a formal proposal like it was a business deal, not a family matter. "I'll only go if you promise to take proper care of Hazel," I told them, handing over a written agreement outlining basic parental responsibilities. "I'll send money from my campus job. I'll call every Sunday. But if I find out you're neglecting her, I will come back and take legal action." They seemed offended that I would even question their parenting, but they agreed. For the first time ever, Mom showed a flicker of pride in my scholarship. It was the only time she ever acknowledged one of my accomplishments. Preparing Hazel was the most painful part. She was 7, all gap-toothed smiles and endless questions. "Why can't I come with you?" she asked, tears pooling in her bright blue eyes. "College is for big people," I explained. "But I'm doing this for us. When I finish school, I'll get a great job and then we'll live together, just you and me. You promise?" "I promise." Hazel nodded. "And I'll call you so often, you'll get tired of hearing my voice." The day I left for Ann Arbor was the hardest of my life. I packed Hazel's favorite stuffed animals in her backpack, wrote little notes for her to open on rough days, and programmed my number into the phone I'd bought her with my savings. Still, walking out that door felt like someone had reached into my chest and ripped my heart out. University life was a culture shock. My roommate, Alyssa, complained constantly that her parents called too often. Meanwhile, I built my whole life around making sure I called Hazel every Sunday. Other students blew money on pizza and parties. I worked 20 hours a week at the campus bookstore, sending half of my paycheck back home. During our Sunday calls, Hazel sounded okay at first. She talked about school, her friends, and the shows she liked, but over time, something shifted. Our calls got shorter. She seemed distracted, less excited to talk. When I asked to speak with our parents, they were always brief and dismissive. "She's fine, Mackenzie. Stop hovering." I poured my energy into school. The more I studied, the more I realized I had a real passion for public policy. My professors noticed too. They said I brought a rare real-world understanding of social systems to class discussions. One professor, Dr. Harmon, became a mentor. He encouraged me to think big: government, leadership, advocacy. "You get how policy affects real families," he said. "Most politicians don't." By junior year, I had landed an internship with a state senator. The experience was eye-opening. I started to see how I could create real, systemic change. I began to imagine a future where I could help families like mine and kids like Hazel. Every semester break, I rushed home to see her, but each time, she felt a little farther away. Our parents had enrolled her in activities with conveniently timed practices that clashed with my visits. When we were finally together, she'd mentioned things my parents had said. Mom says you left because you wanted to be free from us. Dad said college mattered more to you than family. I tried to explain, tried to undo the damage, but the seeds of doubt had already been planted. During one especially painful visit in my senior year, I overheard Mom on the phone with a relative. Mackenzie abandoned her responsibilities. We're the ones raising the child she promised to take care of. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I confronted her immediately. How dare you say I abandoned her? Everything I've done has been for Hazel. If that were true, you wouldn't have left, she replied coldly. You chose yourself, Mackenzie. At least be honest about that. No matter how I explained my intentions, the narrative had already taken root. I had failed Hazel by pursuing my education. The irony was unbearable. The very path I'd taken to secure a better future for both of us had been twisted to make me look selfish and neglectful. As graduation neared, I began making concrete plans to bring Hazel to live with me. Once I had a steady job and a safe apartment, everything would fall into place. I had kept my promise. I never wavered from that goal. What I didn't realize was how thoroughly my family had rewritten our story in my absence and how deeply Hazel had absorbed their version. The foundation for our eventual estrangement had been laid, brick by brick. During those 4 years I spent trying to build a better life for us. I graduated with highest honors, landed a position in the state government in Lansing, and moved into a modest but cozy 2-bedroom apartment. Everything was ready. I could finally welcome Hazel home just as I'd always intended. The weekend after I started my job, I drove to Millfield, hopeful and excited. But the moment I stepped into our childhood home, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Mom and Dad acted like I was interrupting their weekend. Hazel, now 11, barely looked up from her phone. Hey, Hazelnut, I said softly, using the nickname she used to love. I've missed you so much. She shrugged without meeting my gaze. Whatever. The sullen preteen in front of me felt like a stranger. Gone was the bright, affectionate little sister I had practically raised. I chalked it up to normal adolescent mood swings and tried again. I've got your room all set up at my new place. You'll have your own bathroom. And there's a park right across the street. Finally, she glanced up, her brows knit with confusion. What are you talking about? About you coming to live with me. Remember, that was always the plan. Hazel turned toward our parents, suddenly very alert. They, in turn, seemed all too focused on the conversation. I'm not going anywhere, Hazel said firmly. My friends are here. My school is here. Mom stepped in, placing a hand on Hazel's shoulder like she was shielding her. Mackenzie, you can't just disappear for 4 years and then expect to uproot Hazel's life because it suits your schedule. Disappear. My voice cracked. I called every week. I sent money. I came home every break. A phone call isn't the same as being here. Dad cut in. Hazel needed stability, not promises from hundreds of miles away. I stood there, stunned. They had rewritten our entire history, casting me not as the provider, but as the deserter. Worse, Hazel believed them. Over the next few days, I tried again and again to reconnect. I showed her pictures of her new room, told her about the school nearby, even offered to get her a dog, something our parents had always refused. Nothing worked. Her coldness remained impenetrable. During a rare moment alone, I asked her directly, Hazel, what did they tell you about why I went to college? She looked at me, her eyes hard. That you were tired of taking care of me. That you wanted a normal life without a kid sister dragging you down. My heart cracked open. That's not true. I went so I could build a better life for both of us. Then why didn't you take me with you? I couldn't. Dorms don't allow children. I had no money, no job, no way to support us. You just didn't want me, she said bitterly. Years of resentment hardened her voice. It's fine. I don't need you anymore. Before leaving, I confronted my parents, rage and sorrow choking me. How could you turn her against me? After everything I did for her, for you, Mom didn't flinch. We simply told her the truth. That when faced with the choice between responsibility and freedom, you chose freedom. You failed the child they didn't want. I echoed. You mean the child you didn't want? I was the only one who ever wanted her. Dad stepped forward, his tone low and hostile. You should leave. Hazel's better off without your inconsistency. After that visit, I tried to stay connected. I called regularly, sent birthday cards and Christmas gifts. Most were ignored or returned. When Hazel did answer the phone, the calls were brief, awkward. Over time, Even that small thread of connection unraveled. Through mutual friends, I heard troubling news. Hazel had started skipping school. At 14, she was caught drinking. By 16, she was known to be running with a group notorious for drug use. I rushed home whenever the situation grew serious. On one visit, I found her high in her bedroom, pupils pinpoints, likely opioids. "You need help, Hazel," I said gently. "Let me take you to a program." "I don't need your help," she slurred. "Where were you when I actually needed you?" "I've always been here. I've been trying to reach you for years." "Just go back to your perfect little life," she hissed. "That's what you're good at." Leaving by then, our parents had entirely stepped back from parenting. "She won't listen to us," Mom said, almost bored. This is what happens when children are abandoned at a young age. Their psychological manipulation was astounding. They had recast themselves as the stable foundation, and me as the runaway. Hazel, too young to remember the truth clearly, had bought their version. Our final major confrontation came shortly after Hazel's 18th birthday. I heard she had dropped out of high school. Land was now living with a known dealer. I drove to Millfield immediately. I found her in a rundown apartment complex. The sister who opened the door looked like a ghost of the girl I once knew, gaunt, hollow-eyed with track marks scarring her arms. The apartment reeked of cigarette smoke and unwashed laundry. "What do you want?" she snapped. "I want to help you," I said, choking back tears. "Please, Hazel, this isn't you. You don't know me," she scoffed, her laugh sharp and bitter. "You haven't known me since I was 7. That's not true. I've tried to stay connected. Mom and Dad didn't try, they were actually there. You chose your career over me. Everyone around here knows how you failed me." In that moment, I realized how deeply my parents had poisoned my reputation. According to them, stories they spread to teachers, neighbors, even extended family. I'd abandoned the child I'd vowed to raise, leaving them to clean up my mess. "Hazel, I never stopped loving you. Everything I did was for us, for you. I don't want to hear it." She stepped back toward the door. "I never want to see you again. You're not my family. You're nothing to me." The door slammed, and with it, so did any immediate hope of reconciliation. I sat in my car and cried until the tears stopped coming. Then drove back to Lansing with a hollow ache in my chest. I couldn't force Hazel to let me in, but I wouldn't give up on her either. I opened a bank account in her name and started depositing money monthly, something she could access if she ever changed her mind. I stayed informed through distant contacts. And I channeled my grief into my work, determined to stop other families from breaking the way mine had. The pain of being cast as a failure by those I had sacrificed everything for was almost too much to bear. But I refused to let that lie define me. If I couldn't save my sister now, maybe I could help save others. After that devastating encounter with Hazel, I threw myself into my job at the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. My entry-level role involved analyzing programs for at-risk families, work that mirrored my own life too closely. I approached every task with intensity that startled my coworkers. Where others saw numbers, I saw people. Where red tape frustrated others, I saw opportunities. My experience as a child caregiver gave me an insight most of my colleagues with degrees and credentials didn't have. Linda Garner, the department's director, took notice after I submitted reform ideas for the foster care system. She invited me into her office. "You've got a rare perspective, Mackenzie," she said. "You get it from the inside. Have you ever considered a public-facing role?" I hadn't. But Linda's encouragement planted a seed. She became my mentor, introducing me to policymakers and advocacy groups. Under her guidance, I crafted proposals that began gaining traction across Michigan. One night, at a fundraiser for family services, I gave a speech on kinship caregivers, siblings raising siblings, grandparents raising grandkids. Afterward, State Senator James Wilson approached me. "We need more voices like yours," he said. "My legislative director's leaving soon. I'd like you to consider the position." Working in Senator Wilson's office elevated my platform. I drafted bills to support family caregivers, expand mental health access, and launch early intervention programs for vulnerable families. When those bills passed with bipartisan backing, I began to see just how powerful policy could be. Senator Wilson pushed me further. "You're smart, young, and sincere. That's rare in this field," he told me. "You should think about running for office." At 30, I announced my candidacy for state representative in a district near my hometown. I was a complete outsider, running against a 3-term incumbent. but my real-world connection to family issues resonated. My campaign centered on strengthening family systems, improving education, and fighting the opioid crisis ravaging rural communities. I didn't speak about my personal story on the trail, the wounds were too fresh, and I feared retaliation if I publicly exposed the truth. Still, the local paper ran a scathing profile. It quoted family friends calling me ambitious, selfish, someone who abandoned her sibling for politics. I recognized my parents' fingerprints in every quote, but I didn't respond. I let my work speak for itself. To everyone's surprise, including mine, I won, just barely. As a state representative, I built a reputation as a coalition builder. I focused on practical legislation with real-world impact. One of my most successful bills created a youth mentorship program in addiction-prone areas. Early results were promising. It showed a clear drop in teen drug use. Other states began replicating our model. After 2 terms, I decided to aim higher, a state Senate seat. The campaign was brutal. My opponent tried digging for dirt and came up empty. My private nature had become an advantage. I'd spent so long focused on work, there were no scandals to uncover. This time, the victory was decisive. In the Senate, my influence deepened. I chaired the Health and Human Services Committee. I could now help shape statewide policy that affected thousands of families like mine. My reputation as a level-headed problem solver caught the governor's attention. He often sought my advice on legislation. Still, through it all, I kept my private life carefully separated. Only a few trusted colleagues knew about Hazel or my estrangement from our parents. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was hailed as an expert in family policy while my own family was shattered beyond repair. Each time I helped a family stay together, it brought both healing and heartache. Years into my Senate term, Governor Lawrence announced he wouldn't seek re-election. Several party leaders approached me. "You've built a strong record," they said. "Your approval ratings are high. You've got rural and urban support. Michigan's ready for its first female governor." It was overwhelming. A gubernatorial run would mean intense scrutiny. I'd always kept my personal life shielded, but the opportunity to make broader change pulled at me. After weeks of searching, I entered the race. The primary was tough, but respectful. The general election, not so much. My opponent questioned why I never mentioned family or displayed family photos. "What's candidate Davis hiding?" One ad sneered. "No husband. No kids. No family ties. Does Michigan deserve a governor who doesn't believe in family values?" I refused to take the bait. Michigan deserves a governor who understands. Families come in all forms and need support, not judgment, I responded. Voters listened. They cared more about my results than my resume. And on election night I became the youngest female governor in Michigan history, winning by a comfortable margin. As I took the oath of office, the cameras captured a moment that seemed triumphant to observers. Only I knew the hollowness behind my smile. At what should have been the pinnacle of achievement, there was no family in the audience cheering me on. No sister beaming with pride. The people who should have been closest were strangers to my success. I channeled that pain into my inaugural address without revealing its source. Too many Michigan families are struggling in silence. Too many children are carrying adult burdens. As your governor, I promise that no child in our state will face adult responsibilities alone. No family will fall through the cracks on my watch. My first major initiative as governor was creating the Michigan Family Resilience Program, providing comprehensive support for families in crisis and young caregivers shouldering adult responsibilities. The program included specialized counseling, respite care, educational support, and financial assistance, all the things that might have kept my own family intact. The program garnered national attention and became a model for other states. I was featured in major publications as an innovative leader addressing root causes of family trauma. The public saw a success story, a dedicated public servant improving lives across the state. No one knew that each night, after the staff left, and the mansion grew quiet, I would sit alone in my office, staring at the only photo of Hazel I kept, the two of us at the lake when she was 6, before everything fell apart. No one knew that Michigan's celebrated governor cried herself to sleep many nights, wondering where her sister was and if she was even alive. The ultimate irony of my situation wasn't lost on me. I had achieved extraordinary professional success, was respected and admired by constituents and colleagues alike while being deemed a failure by the only people whose approval had ever truly mattered to me. Then came the day my carefully separated worlds collided in a courtroom, forever changing everything. I was reviewing education budget proposals when my chief of staff, Rachel, knocked and entered with an unusual expression, concern, part hesitation. "Governor, there's something you should see." She placed a newspaper on my desk, folded to a small article in the crime section. The headline punched the air from my lungs. "Millfield woman arrested in multi-county drug trafficking operation." Below it, a mugshot of Hazel, gaunt, but unmistakably my sister. According to the article, Hazel had been caught transporting significant quantities of heroin and prescription opioids. She also faced fraud charges for using elderly victims' identities to obtain credit cards. The case was being handled in the Ingham County Courthouse in Lansing, just minutes from the governor's mansion. "Do you know her?" Rachel asked, carefully. I nodded, unable to find words. "I'm so sorry," she said. "What do you need?" What I needed was impossible to turn back time. To have my sister grow up with the love and stability she deserved. To rewrite our family's history. What I could actually do was much more limited. "I need to attend the trial," I said finally, quietly. "No official capacity." Rachel looked concerned. "The press will have a field day if they make the connection." "They won't make the connection unless someone tells them. We don't share a last name anymore. She's using our mother's maiden name. And no one expects to see the governor sitting in her regular courtroom." The trial was scheduled for the following week. I rearranged my calendar, citing personal matters for the cleared afternoon. On the appointed day, I dressed in my most nondescript outfit: dark slacks, a simple blouse, hair pulled back under a plain baseball cap, minimal makeup, glasses I rarely wore publicly. The courtroom was modestly filled, few reporters from local papers, court staff, other defendants' families. I slipped into the back row just as proceedings began, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain others could hear it. Hazel was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, handcuffs securing her wrists. She'd lost more weight, her cheekbones sharp enough to cast shadows. Dark circles ringed her eyes. At 25, she looked a decade older. I pressed my palm against my mouth to stifle a gasp. The charges were read. Possession with intent to distribute, trafficking across county lines, identity theft, credit card fraud. Hazel stood impassively, her expression vacant. She pleaded not guilty to all charges, though the evidence outlined by the prosecutor seemed overwhelming. To my surprise, my parents were present, sitting near the front. They hadn't changed much, Dad a bit grayer, Mom a bit thinner, both wearing expressions of aggrieved martyrdom. When called to testify about Hazel's character and background, they painted themselves as devoted parents who had done everything possible for their troubled daughter. "We gave her every advantage," my mother claimed, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. "But she fell in with the wrong crowd after her sister abandoned us." There it was, the familiar narrative, now part of court testimony. The prosecutor asked for elaboration. "Mackenzie was like a mother to Hazel from the beginning," Dad explained, his voice heavy with manufactured regret. "Then she left for college and never really came back. Hazel was devastated, started acting out. Nothing we did could fill that void." I dug my fingernails into my palms, fighting the urge to stand and shout the truth. The defense attorney seized on this narrative, suggesting Hazel's crimes stemmed from childhood trauma and abandonment issues. She wasn't a hardened criminal, but a victim of circumstances psychologically damaged by early attachment disruption. It was surreal, hearing my family's distorted version of events presented as mitigating evidence in a criminal trial. More surreal was watching Hazel nod along, clearly having internalized this explanation for her life's trajectory. The proceedings continued with testimony from arresting officers and evidence presentation. I sat frozen, absorbing every detail, wondering how my bright, loving sister had fallen so far. A brief recess was called, during which I remained seated, afraid movement might draw attention. When court resumed, the judge, the Honorable Michael Thornton, a respected jurist I'd met at several state functions, began reviewing case notes. He glanced up occasionally, scanning the courtroom. During one such survey, his gaze passed over me, then snapped back. His eyes widened in recognition. I held my breath, praying he would maintain professional decorum and continue. Instead, he adjusted his glasses, stared more intently, and then uttered the words that would change everything. "Excuse me, but why tour the governor?" The courtroom, previously filled with murmurs and shuffling papers, fell into absolute silence. Every head turned in my direction. A reporter dropped his pen. The prosecutor froze mid-dash note. My parents swiveled in their seats, faces morphing from confusion to shock. Hazel, who had been staring at the floor, looked up sharply. Our eyes met for the first time in years. Recognition, confusion, and something unreadable flashed across her face. I stood slowly, removing my cap and glasses. There was no point in pretense now. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my voice steady despite my thundering heart. "I am." Judge Thornton cleared his throat, visibly collecting himself. "Governor Davis, this is unexpected. May I ask your interest in these proceedings?" Every eye in the courtroom remained fixed on me. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft whir of the air conditioning and the furious scratching of a reporter's pen. "The defendant is my sister, Your Honor." The collective gasp was audible. Flashbulbs erupted from the press section. My parents sat rigid with shock. Hazel's expression was unreadable, her eyes wide and fixed on me. "Order," Judge Thornton commanded, banging his gavel. "No photographs." In my courtroom, he turned back to me. "Governor, this is highly irregular. Are you here in an official capacity?" "No, Your Honor. I'm here as Mackenzie Davis, Hazel's sister. Nothing more." The judge considered this, then nodded. "Would you like to approach the bench?" I moved forward through the now buzzing courtroom, aware of every step. As I passed my parents, my mother hissed, "What are you doing?" I ignored her, continuing until I stood before the judge. "Your Honor, I apologize for the disruption. I came to observe quietly." "I appreciate that, Governor. But your presence changes the complexion of these proceedings." He lowered his voice. "Does defense counsel know you're the defendant's sister?" "No. We've been estranged. For years, few people know of our relationship." Judge Thornton frowned thoughtfully. "Given these extraordinary circumstances, I'm calling a 30-minute recess. Counsel from both sides. In my chambers immediately." He banged his gavel again. "Court is in recess." As court officers led Hazel out, she looked back at me, her expression a complex mixture of anger, confusion, and something that might have been hope. In the hallway, reporters swarmed. My security detail, alerted to the situation, arrived to create a buffer. Rachel materialized at my side. Crisis management mode activated. "Governor, we need to issue a statement," she urged. "Not yet," I replied. "This isn't a political situation. It's personal. I need to see this through first." When court reconvened, the energy was entirely different. Additional security had been posted. More press had arrived. Judge Thornton addressed the courtroom with stern authority. "What has occurred here today is unprecedented. But this remains a court of law. We will proceed with appropriate decorum. Governor Davis has indicated a desire to make a statement relevant to these proceedings. As this is an extraordinary circumstance, I will allow it." I approached the witness stand and was sworn in. Looking directly at Hazel, I began speaking. "My name is Mackenzie Davis. I'm the current governor of Michigan. But more relevantly, I'm Hazel Davis's older sister. I was 11 when Hazel was born." Our parents' eye glanced at Caroline, and Richard, who glared back, were functionally absent from the time Hazel was an infant. I was her primary caregiver. I fed her, bathed her, helped with homework, attended parent-teacher conferences, worked part-time jobs to buy her clothes and school supplies. The courtroom was utterly silent. When I was 18, I received a full scholarship to the University of Michigan. It was the only way I could eventually provide Hazel with the stable home she deserved. Before leaving, I set up supports, financial arrangements, regular check-ins, plans to bring her to live with me after graduation. I called weekly. I sent money from my campus jobs. I visited whenever possible. I paused, fighting to keep my voice steady. During those 4 years, our parents systematically alienated Hazel from me. They told her I had abandoned her because I didn't want the responsibility. They told our community I had failed the child they didn't want. By the time I graduated and was established enough to provide a home for Hazel, she had been convinced I had betrayed her. Every attempt I made to reconnect was rejected. I reached into my purse and removed a folder, handing it to the court officer. "These are financial records showing regular deposits I've made to an account for Hazel since I was 19. Bank statements documenting money. I sent home phone records from college weekly calls, many unanswered. Documentation of the apartment I leased, complete with a bedroom prepared for Hazel, who was never allowed to live there." The defense attorney was frantically taking notes, clearly seeing a new strategy forming. The prosecutor looked conflicted. I'm not here to influence these proceedings inappropriately. Hazel must take responsibility for her actions. But the narrative that she was abandoned by a selfish sister who chose education over family is false. It's a fiction created to cover parental neglect and emotional abuse that has shaped both our lives. I turned to face Hazel directly. I never stopped loving you. I never stopped trying to reach you. Everything I've achieved has been hollow because you weren't there to share it. Tears streamed down Hazel's face. For the first time in years, she looked like the little sister I remembered, vulnerable, hurt, but present in a way she hadn't been during the earlier proceedings. The judge called another recess. This time, Hazel's attorney requested a meeting with the prosecutor. When court reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted again. Several new witnesses had been hastily assembled: Hazel's former teachers, our old neighbor Mrs. Lancaster, even my high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Bennett. One by one, they corroborated my account. Mrs. Lancaster testified about seeing me walking Hazel to elementary school while I was still in high school myself, preparing her lunches, taking her to doctor appointments. Mrs. Bennett explained how I had structured my college choice around eventually providing for Hazel. My parents attempted to leave during this testimony, but the judge ordered them to remain. Their faces showed a mixture of fury and embarrassment as their carefully constructed narrative unraveled publicly. The prosecutor and defense attorney jointly approached the bench. After a brief conference, the prosecutor addressed the court. Your Honor, in light of new mitigating information and the defendant's willingness to cooperate with ongoing investigations, the state is amending the charges. We're dropping the most serious trafficking counts in exchange for a guilty plea to lesser possession and fraud charges, with a recommendation for a rehabilitation-focused sentence. Judge Thornton nodded. Double quotes Ms. Davis. Do you understand and accept these terms? Hazel, looking dazed but more present than before, nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The judge continued, given these extraordinary circumstances, and the defendant's lack of prior convictions, I'm inclined to consider alternative sentencing. Instead of prison time, I'm ordering enrollment in the state's intensive drug rehabilitation program, followed by supervised probation and community service. He looked directly at me. Governor, I trust this does not represent a conflict of interest. This program exists independently of your office's oversight. It does not, Your Honor. It was established under the previous administration. Very well. He turned back to Hazel. Ms. Davis, you're being offered a chance many don't get. I strongly suggest you take it seriously. As the proceedings concluded, the media frenzy outside intensified. Rachel had arranged for a private exit and secure transport for both Hazel and me, as court officers prepared to lead Hazel away. Our eyes met again. Can I talk to her? Hazel asked her attorney, who looked to the judge. Judge Thornton nodded briefly. In the conference room, with officers present, in a small room adjacent to the courtroom, Hazel and I faced each other. The governor and the convicted drug offender, the sisters who had once been inseparable. Why are you here? She asked, her voice raspy from crying. Because you're my sister. That never changed. Why didn't you tell anyone? Use your connections. You're the governor, for God's sake. That's not how justice works. Hazel and I didn't want to make things worse for you with some kind of special treatment scandal. She shook her head in disbelief. All this time you've been... I saw you on TV sometimes. I told people in my halfway house my sister knew the governor. They thought I was delusional. A choked laugh escaped me. Life is strange. Mom and Dad, they really lied about everything, didn't they? They rewrote our history to absolve themselves. Hazel wiped her eyes with shaking hands. I don't know what's real anymore. I've been so angry at you for so long. I know. We have a lot to talk about. If you're willing, she nodded slowly. I think I'd like that. An officer indicated our time was up. As Hazel was led away, she turned back. Mackenzie. I'm sorry, I said. I never wanted to see you again. For the first time that day, I allowed my tears to fall freely. I'm just glad that wasn't true. Outside, the press clamored for statements. My parents had slipped away already, aware their version of events would no longer hold up to scrutiny. I faced the cameras briefly. Rachel at my side. Today, personal and public matters intersected in ways I never anticipated. I ask for privacy. As my family navigates a difficult healing process, what happened in court today speaks for itself. As questions shouted around me, I added one final comment. Family trauma affects countless Michigan residents. It's why I've prioritized support systems for vulnerable families and at-risk youth. Today's events only strengthen my commitment to that work. The story dominated news cycles for days. Political analysts debated whether the scandal would damage my career, hominize me to voters. I ignored it all, focusing instead on something far more important: the fragile reconnection with my sister. 6 months passed. Fall turned to winter, and the Michigan landscape transformed under a blanket of snow. The media frenzy had eventually subsided, replaced by more pressing political controversies. My approval ratings, after an initial dip, had stabilized on, even improved slightly. Many constituents sent messages of support, cheering their own stories of family estrangement and reconciliation. I sat in my office at the governor's mansion, reviewing a stack of reports, when my assistant knocked. "Your 3 o'clock is here, Governor." I glanced at my watch. "Send her in, please." The door opened and Hazel entered. She looked dramatically different from the hollow-eyed defendant in the courtroom. For months in the state's premier rehabilitation facility had restored her physically. Her face had filled out. Her complexion was healthier. Her eyes were clear. She wore simple jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back neatly. "Right on time," I said, smiling as I rose to greet her. "The punctuality they drill into us is intense." She replied with a small smile of her own. 5 minutes early is on time. On time is late. How was the drive with Thomas? Thomas was the security officer I'd assigned to transport Hazel to our bi-weekly meetings. Good, he's teaching me about basketball. Apparently, I should care about the Pistons. These moments of normal conversation still felt precious fragile. Our relationship was being rebuilt one careful brick at a time. I led her to the sitting area where tea was already set up. These meetings had become our ritual, alternating between the governor's mansion when I was pressed for time, and the rehabilitation facility when I could make the drive. We had started with supervised visits. A counselor always present to help us navigate the emotional minefields. Now, we met alone, though her therapy team remained heavily involved in her recovery. "How was group this week?" I asked, pouring tea. "Intense. We did family systems work." She added honey to her cup. "I talked about Mom and Dad a lot. Our parents had maintained complete radio silence since the trial. They'd moved to Florida soon after, apparently unwilling to face the community after their carefully spun narrative had publicly unraveled." "Have you heard from them?" I asked, carefully. Hazel shook her head. "Not directly. Aunt Susan said they're telling everyone I manipulated the system because of your position." I sighed. "Some stories are too deeply entrenched to change." "I used to think you were the villain in our story," Hazel said quietly. "I built my entire identity around being the abandoned sister. And I built mine around being the sister who failed to protect you." Despite everything, these honest exchanges had only become possible recently. The first months were hard, with tears, blame, and painful excavations of the past. Hazel had alternated between clinging to her old narrative and being overwhelmed by the truth. I struggled with guilt, I admitted, for not finding some way to break through the walls our parents built. "My counselor says we were both victims of parental alienation," Hazel said. "It's a real thing. Apparently, when parents deliberately turn a child against another parent or family member." "I've been reading about it," I admitted. "It helped me understand how they were so effective. I believed them because I needed to." "If what they said was true," Hazel said, voice low, "then at least they wanted me even if you didn't. The alternative was too painful. That neither of you did." "I never stopped wanting you in my life, Hazel. Never." She nodded, eyes damp. "I know that now." We sipped our tea in comfortable silence. Outside, snow fell softly across the mansion grounds. "I have news," Hazel said eventually. "The program director thinks I'm ready for the transition phase. I'll be moving to a halfway house next month. More independence, but still structured." "That's wonderful." I meant it sincerely. Her progress had been remarkable. "Where will the house be?" "That's the thing." She hesitated. "There are a few options in different counties. I requested Ingram to be closer to here." The implication warmed me. She was choosing to be near me. "I could help you find an apartment when you're ready," I offered. "No pressure, but the option is there." "Thank you, I'd like that." Our conversation shifted to lighter topics: a book Hazel was reading, legislation I was working on, a funny story involving her roommate at the facility. These normal exchanges felt like miracles after years of silence. As our meeting concluded, I walked her to the door. "Next week at Lakeside." I asked, referring to the rehabilitation center. Yes. Oh, I almost forgot. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small wrapped package. It's not much. I made it in occupational therapy. I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a simple clay picture frame, glazed in a soft blue. It held a photo of us from 20 years ago, Hazel about 5. Me 16, both smiling by the lake near our childhood home. I found it in my old things, she said, one of the few photos I kept. My throat tightened. I have the same one. It's been on my desk at home all these years. Really? She looked genuinely surprised. Even when we weren't speaking. Especially then. We hugged goodbye, a little awkward but with genuine affection. As Thomas escorted her out, I returned to my desk and placed the framed photo beside my computer. Later that evening, I made a decision I'd been contemplating for months. I called my chief of staff. Rachel, I want to formalize the Young Caregivers Initiative we've been discussing. Make it official next week. Excellent, she replied. What are we calling it? I paused. The Bridge Program, because it creates connections where they're most needed. The Bridge Program became my administration's signature achievement. It offered comprehensive support for children raising siblings or caring for parents, counseling, academic aid, respite care, and financial assistance. It addressed the same gaps that had fractured my own family, ensuring that other young caregivers wouldn't have to face the same impossible choices at the small private launch event held at the governor's mansion. Hazel stood quietly at the back of the room. Few people recognized her or understood her significance. As I concluded my remarks about the importance of supporting vulnerable families, our eyes met across the crowd. Her slight nod conveyed everything words couldn't. We weren't fully healed. Some wounds were too deep. Some years too irrevocably lost. Our parents remained estranged, unwilling to acknowledge their role in our broken past. But Hazel and I had found our way back to each other, rebuilding a relationship different from, but no less meaningful than, the one we might have had. I had spent years believing I'd failed the person who mattered most. Now, I understood that the real failure would have been giving up on Hazel, on reconciliation, on the idea that broken things could be mended, even if the seams still showed. As governor, I had the power to impact millions, but the most profound change happened in the quiet moments between two sisters finding their way back to the truth of their shared story. Have you ever had a relationship you thought was permanently broken, only to find a path to healing? Or been misunderstood by the people closest to you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Every family has its complications, and sharing helps us all feel less alone. Thank you for listening to my journey. Please like, subscribe, and share if this resonated with you. And remember, sometimes, the most broken relationships have the potential for the most beautiful reconciliations.